A Gulfstream G550 lifts off from Rafik Hariri International Airport at 6:47 a.m., its engines cutting through Beirut's humid morning air. The flight plan lists Athens as destination, a routine 2-hour journey across the Mediterranean. In the main cabin sits a man in his early 50s wearing an Italian suit, reviewing documents spread across the leather table before him. 2 bodyguards occupy rear seats, their eyes scanning instruments and windows with practiced vigilance. The co-pilot confirms clearance from Lebanese air traffic control. Nothing about this departure suggests anything except wealth and urgency, another private jet carrying another businessman toward another deal. 43 minutes into the flight, the pilot's voice crackles through the emergency frequency. Mayday, Mayday, this is Gulfstream November 78 Delta, experiencing rapid cabin depressurization, requesting immediate emergency landing. The aircraft banks sharply, descending from 41,000 feet as oxygen masks deploy automatically throughout the cabin. Cypriot air traffic controllers at Larnaca clear all runways, vectoring the distressed jet toward emergency approach. Fire trucks and ambulances race toward designated positions. Within 12 minutes, the Gulfstream touches down hard, tires smoking against asphalt as thrust reversers scream and brakes strain against momentum that wants to carry the aircraft beyond safety. Cypriot emergency responders board through the main cabin door, finding a scene that appears straightforward yet deeply wrong. The businessman slumps in his seat, head tilted back, eyes fixed and dilated, a thin line of foam dried at the corner of his mouth. Both bodyguards lie unconscious in the aisle, breathing but unresponsive. Their weapons still holstered. The pilots are shaken but functional, describing sudden pressure loss that triggered every warning system simultaneously. Medical personnel declare the businessman dead at the scene. Preliminary assessment suggesting cardiac arrest induced by hypoxia. The bodyguards are rushed to Larnaca General Hospital, where doctors work to stabilize their breathing and brain function. Within 6 hours, routine fingerprint identification reveals something that transforms a tragic accident into an international incident. The deceased businessman's prints match no Lebanese national in any database, but trigger immediate alerts across 3 intelligence networks. The dead man is not the merchant importer his passport claims, but Imad Karim, Hezbollah's chief weapons procurement officer, a man Israeli intelligence has been hunting for 8 years. His elimination had been authorized at the highest levels of government, his networks responsible for smuggling advanced missile systems from Tehran to southern Lebanon. And his death aboard a private jet in international airspace represents assassination perfected, executed invisibly, while leaving investigators with nothing but mechanical failure and questions that have no satisfying answers. Imad Karim was born in 1971 in Baalbek, a city carved into Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, where Hezbollah's influence runs deeper than government authority. His childhood unfolded against the backdrop of Israeli occupation and civil war, where the sound of artillery became as routine as morning prayer calls. His father operated a small electronics repair shop, teaching young Imad how circuits worked, how components connected, how systems could be understood through patient observation and logical analysis. That technical mindset would later define his approach to weapons procurement, viewing smuggling networks as engineering problems requiring elegant solutions. He watched Israeli jets bomb his neighborhood in 1982, the explosions etching themselves into memory like blueprints he would one day use to design his own form of warfare. Karim's radicalization was not sudden conversion, but gradual calcification of anger into purpose. He joined Hezbollah's youth wing at 16, initially running messages and distributing propaganda in neighborhoods where Israeli patrols rarely ventured. Commanders noticed his discipline, his refusal to speak unnecessarily, his methodical approach to every task assigned. While other recruits were loud and emotional, Imad remained quiet and analytical, processing information rather than reacting to it. By his early 20s, he had been recruited into logistics operations, coordinating safe houses and transport routes for weapons moving through the Bekaa Valley. He demonstrated unusual talent for compartmentalization, designing networks where each cell knew only its immediate function, ensuring that compromise of one element wouldn't collapse the entire system. His rise through Hezbollah's hierarchy was built on results rather than rhetoric. In 2003, he coordinated the smuggling of advanced anti-tank missiles from Syria into Lebanon, designing routes that exploited terrain and timing to evade Israeli surveillance drones. The operation succeeded flawlessly, delivering weapons that would later devastate Israeli armor during the 2006 war. By 2008, he had become indispensable, the invisible architect of procurement networks, stretching from Tehran through Damascus to Beirut. His methodology was surgical, treating geography as geometry and calculating logistics with mathematical precision. He never appeared in official communications, never left digital footprints, operating through intermediaries and coded language that intelligence analysts struggled to penetrate. Israeli intelligence first flagged Karim in 2004 when signals intercepts revealed a ghost coordinator directing weapons movements without ever appearing in direct communications. Mossad analysts called him the engineer, a phantom whose influence was undeniable but whose identity remained uncertain for years. In 2009, a captured Hezbollah operative finally provided his name and photograph, transforming him from abstract threat into concrete target. Intelligence assessments concluded that eliminating Karim would sever critical supply lines, disrupting Hezbollah's ability to acquire precision-guided missiles that threatened Israeli cities. In January 2011, he was placed on the TIT list, designated Priority Red. His assassination authorized through encrypted directives that carried the weight of state necessity. What Karim didn't know, as he continued his careful movements between Beirut, Damascus, and Tehran, was that every pattern he established was being catalogued, every habit documented, every vulnerability identified by analysts preparing the conditions for his elimination. Tracking Imad Karim required patience, measured in years rather than months, analyzing patterns buried beneath layers of operational security he had perfected through decades of survival. Mossad's collection department deployed surveillance teams across 3 countries, monitoring his movements through cellular tower pings, facial recognition at border crossings, and human sources embedded within Hezbollah's logistics network. What emerged was a portrait of extreme caution, a man who varied his routes obsessively, used multiple vehicles for single journeys, and avoided predictable schedules. But even the most disciplined operational security contains vulnerabilities, and analysts noticed one consistent pattern. Karim traveled frequently by private aviation, using charter jets that departed from smaller airports where security was lighter and passenger manifests easier to falsify. He believed flying privately made him safer, removing the exposure of commercial terminals and the unpredictability of fellow passengers. Israeli intelligence recognized that private aviation presented unique assassination opportunities unavailable in other environments. Aircraft operate in controlled spaces where variables can be limited and manipulated, where mechanical failures are plausible explanations for deaths, and where international airspace complicates jurisdictional questions about who bears responsibility for investigating incidents. Mossad's research division began studying how aircraft environmental systems could be weaponized, how oxygen delivery could be compromised, and how toxins might be introduced through ventilation in ways that would appear as equipment malfunction rather than sabotage. The challenge was not theoretical possibility, but practical execution, creating conditions where Karim would board a specific aircraft that Mossad had already compromised without triggering the suspicion that kept him alive. The operational concept emerged through months of planning sessions in Tel Aviv, where intelligence officers, engineers, and toxicology specialists collaborated on scenarios that balanced lethality with plausible deniability. They needed Karim on a flight Mossad controlled, but forcing that outcome through obvious manipulation would alert his security protocols and abort the mission before it began. The solution required creating authentic business circumstances that would make Karim choose the compromised aircraft himself, believing the decision was his own rather than enemy design. This meant building an entirely fabricated commercial opportunity compelling enough to justify urgent travel, detailed enough to survive his inevitable verification, and timed precisely to intersect with the prepared aircraft. In September 2011, Mossad activated a network of shell companies established years earlier for exactly this type of operation. Front organizations in Cyprus and Greece began circulating information about a lucrative weapons procurement opportunity requiring immediate negotiation in Athens. The bait was designed specifically for Karim, involving Russian military equipment moving through Ukrainian channels that Hezbollah had been seeking for months. Intermediaries known to have Karim's confidence were fed details through carefully constructed information chains that made the opportunity appear legitimate, time-sensitive, and requiring his personal involvement. The trap was set with components so realistic that even intelligence professionals examining them would struggle to identify deception, because the best lies are built from fragments of truth arranged to serve purposes their components never intended. The shell company network Mossad activated for Operation Altitude had been constructed over 3 years, layered with such meticulous detail that even forensic accountants would find authentic business activity. Helios Maritime Solutions operated from a legitimate office in Limassol, Cyprus, staffed by unwitting employees who processed real shipping contracts alongside the fabricated ones designed for intelligence purposes. The company maintained actual trade relationships with Ukrainian arms dealers, establishing credibility that made its sudden interest in brokering a specific weapons deal appear consistent with established business patterns. Bank accounts showed genuine transaction histories, tax filings were current and accurate, and corporate registrations traced through multiple jurisdictions in ways that suggested profit motivation rather than intelligence operation. Through carefully selected intermediaries, Helios began circulating information about a unique procurement opportunity involving Cornet anti-tank missiles and Igla surface-to-air systems, allegedly available through a Ukrainian Defense Ministry contact willing to bypass official channels for appropriate compensation. The weapons specifications matched exactly what Hezbollah had been seeking through its Iranian suppliers, but had struggled to acquire due to international sanctions and Israeli interdiction efforts. The pricing was competitive, but not suspiciously low. The delivery timeline was realistic, and the requirement for immediate negotiation was justified by competing buyers from Syria and Yemen. Every detail was calibrated to trigger Karim's interest, while avoiding the too perfect quality that might signal deception to someone whose survival depended on detecting traps. The information reached Karim through a Lebanese arms broker named Marwan Khalil, a man Hezbollah had used successfully for years, without realizing he also provided occasional intelligence to Mossad in exchange for immunity from prosecution on unrelated criminal matters. Khalil presented the opportunity as time-sensitive, explaining that Ukrainian sellers required face-to-face negotiation in Athens within 72 hours, or the weapons would go to alternative buyers. He emphasized the seller's insistence on dealing only with decision-makers who could authorize immediate payment, making Karim's personal attendance necessary rather than optional. The pressure was deliberate, designed to compress Karim's decision timeline and limit the due diligence that might expose inconsistencies in the fabricated scenario. Karim's initial response was predictable caution, demanding verification of the Ukrainian source's legitimacy and the weapon's actual availability before committing to travel. Mossad had anticipated this, preparing backstopping so deep that verification efforts would only reinforce the deception's credibility. Phone numbers provided for the Ukrainian contact connected to actual former military officers who had been recruited as unwitting participants through separate cover stories. Documentation about the weapons included serial numbers matching real equipment that had genuinely gone missing from Ukrainian inventories, details obtained through intelligence cooperation with Western services monitoring Eastern European arms flows. By the time Karim completed his verification process, he had found exactly what Mossad wanted him to find, a deal that appeared legitimate because every element he could check was built from authentic components arranged to serve a purpose he couldn't see. The private aviation company selected for the operation was Meridian Executive Air, a legitimate charter service operating from Beirut with a fleet of 6 aircraft serving wealthy Lebanese clients and regional businessmen requiring discretion. Mossad had been cultivating access to Meridian for 18 months, not through dramatic recruitment, but through the patient accumulation of small advantages that intelligence services exploit better than anyone. A maintenance contractor working on Meridian's aircraft was a Syrian émigré whose family in Damascus faced constant harassment that mysteriously ceased after he began providing occasional favors to individuals he never quite identified. The company's flight scheduling coordinator carried debts to a Cyprus casino secretly owned through a Mossad front organization, debts that were quietly forgiven in exchange for minor accommodations, like ensuring certain clients flew on specific aircraft. Through these cultivated channels, Mossad learned that Karim exclusively used Meridian when flying privately, trusting the company's discretion and its willingness to file flight plans under passenger names that didn't match actual travelers. Intelligence analysts studied Meridian's fleet composition, identifying the Gulfstream G550 registered as November 78 Delta as the optimal target. The aircraft was newer than others in the fleet, equipped with advanced environmental systems that could be modified, and scheduled for routine maintenance that would provide access without triggering suspicion. In early October, the maintenance contractor received instructions to install a modified air filtration component during the Gulfstream's scheduled service, a device externally identical to standard equipment, but internally engineered to serve a very different purpose. The filtration modification was a masterpiece of technical precision, designed by engineers in Tel Aviv's classified laboratories who specialized in weaponizing civilian technology. The device appeared completely normal under standard inspection, passing every safety check and functioning exactly as expected during regular operations. Its hidden capability, activated only under specific conditions, triggered by a radio frequency signal transmitted from equipment small enough to conceal in a mobile phone. Once activated, the device would compromise the cabin's oxygen distribution system while simultaneously releasing microscopic quantities of a binary toxin stored in sealed chambers within the filtration housing. The poison selected was a modified organophosphate compound that induced cardiac arrest through respiratory failure, symptoms easily attributable to hypoxia from depressurization. Installing the device required accessing the aircraft during legitimate maintenance windows, when technicians routinely worked on environmental systems without special oversight. The contractor performed the installation during a scheduled inspection in mid-October, replacing the standard filtration assembly with the modified version in a process that took less than 40 minutes and appeared identical to routine parts replacement. Documentation was updated to show the new component installed according to manufacturer specifications, its serial number registered in Meridian's maintenance logs as genuine Gulfstream equipment. The aircraft returned to service immediately, flying 3 routine charters before Mossad received confirmation that Karim had scheduled travel to Athens for October 28th, booking passage aboard the very aircraft now waiting to become his execution chamber. October 28th arrived with clear skies across the eastern Mediterranean, perfect conditions for the flight that would carry Imad Karim toward a meeting he believed was about weapons procurement, but was actually his final journey. He arrived at Beirut's private aviation terminal at 6:15 a.m., accompanied by his 2 personal bodyguards, men trained by Hezbollah's security apparatus to detect threats and protect high-value personnel. They had swept the terminal building upon arrival, checked the aircraft's exterior for tampering, and verified the pilot's identity against their own records. Everything appeared routine. A familiar aircraft from a trusted charter company, flight crew they had seen on previous journeys, and departure procedures that matched their security protocols exactly. The Gulf Stream lifted off at 6:47 a.m., climbing steadily over Beirut's coastline before banking west across the Mediterranean toward Athens. Karim settled into his usual seat, spreading procurement documents across the cabin table while his bodyguards positioned themselves in rear seats where they could monitor both the cockpit and their principal. The flight was smooth, the cabin pressurized to the equivalent of 6,000 feet. Temperature maintained at a comfortable 72 degrees. 28 minutes after takeoff, as the aircraft leveled at its cruising altitude of 41,000 feet, a Mossad operative stationed in a boat 17 miles off the Lebanese coast activated an encrypted transmission device aimed at the Gulf Stream's flight path, sending the radio frequency signal that would trigger the modified filtration system. Inside the aircraft, the activation occurred silently and invisibly, the compromised filtration unit beginning its programmed sequence without any indication that environmental systems had been altered. Oxygen concentration in the cabin began dropping gradually, decreasing from the normal 21% to 17% over 8 minutes, a reduction subtle enough that passengers wouldn't immediately notice, but sufficient to begin affecting cognitive function and respiratory efficiency. Simultaneously, microscopic quantities of the organophosphate toxin were released through ventilation outlets, dispersing throughout the cabin in concentrations calibrated to induce cardiac arrest within 12 to 15 minutes. Karim continued reviewing his documents, initially unaware that his body was already processing poison while his brain struggled with oxygen deprivation that felt like nothing more than mild fatigue. At 39 minutes into the flight, Karim experienced the first undeniable symptoms, sudden dizziness followed by difficulty breathing that made him loosen his collar and reach for the call button. His bodyguards noticed his distress simultaneously, standing to assist just as their own symptoms manifested, vision tunneling and legs weakening beneath them. The pilot, protected by the cockpit's separate oxygen system, heard Karim's labored breathing through the cabin intercom and immediately checked pressurization gauges, finding readings that showed rapid decompression in progress. He declared the emergency instantly, initiating descent while transmitting mayday calls that would bring the aircraft down in Cyprus, unaware that the mechanical failure he reported was actually murder disguised as equipment malfunction executing flawlessly at altitude. The Gulf Stream's emergency landing at Larnaca International Airport occurred with the controlled urgency of pilots trained to handle catastrophic failures, touching down hard but safely on runway 04 at 7:51 a.m. Cypriot emergency services surrounded the aircraft immediately, fire crews positioning foam cannons, while paramedics approached the main cabin door that ground personnel opened from outside since the crew was prioritizing aircraft control over passenger assistance. The scene inside appeared exactly as depressurization incidents typically present. Unconscious passengers, deployed oxygen masks hanging useless from overhead compartments, and a cabin environment suggesting sudden life support failure. Medical personnel found Karim dead in his seat, his bodyguards barely breathing, their conditions consistent with severe hypoxia requiring immediate intensive care. Initial investigation by Cypriot aviation authorities focused on mechanical failure as the obvious explanation, examining the Gulf Stream's pressurization systems for faults that would explain the rapid cabin decompression the pilots reported. Technicians found anomalous readings in the environmental control unit, pressure sensors showing fluctuations consistent with seal failure or duct rupture. Exactly the evidence Mossad's engineers had designed the modified filtration system to create. The aircraft's maintenance logs showed recent service on environmental systems, but all work appeared properly documented, with components installed according to manufacturer specifications. Nothing suggested sabotage, only the routine possibility that even well-maintained aircraft occasionally suffer equipment failures that prove catastrophic. The toxicological examination of Karim's body was conducted at Larnaca General Hospital by a pathologist whose expertise centered on aviation medicine rather than forensic toxicology, a circumstance that worked entirely in Mossad's favor. The autopsy revealed cardiac arrest preceded by acute respiratory distress, findings completely consistent with hypoxia from sudden depressurization at high altitude. Blood samples showed elevated carbon dioxide levels and decreased oxygen saturation, expected physiological responses to oxygen deprivation. The organophosphate compound in his system was present in concentrations so minute that standard toxicology screens didn't detect it, and even if more sensitive analysis had been ordered, the poison's chemical structure was designed to degrade rapidly post-mortem, leaving metabolites easily mistaken for natural stress hormones. Cypriot authorities issued preliminary findings within 48 hours, declaring Karim's death accidental, caused by cardiac arrest induced by hypoxia during an in-flight depressurization event of undetermined origin. The aircraft was impounded for detailed investigation, but initial assessments found no evidence of deliberate sabotage, only mechanical failure that investigators attributed to possible manufacturing defects or undetected maintenance issues. Meridian Executive Air cooperated fully with investigators, providing all maintenance records and expressing corporate devastation at the tragedy. The bodyguards recovered sufficiently to provide statements describing sudden pressure loss and oxygen mask deployment, accounts that matched the pilot's reports exactly. Every element of the investigation pointed toward the same conclusion: a terrible accident explained entirely by equipment failure, leaving no thread for investigators to pull that might unravel the truth of what actually occurred at 41,000 feet. The fiction of accidental death survived less than 12 hours after Karim's fingerprints were processed through Interpol databases and triggered alerts across multiple intelligence networks simultaneously. Lebanese security services contacted Cypriot authorities within hours, informing them that the deceased businessman was actually Imad Karim, a Hezbollah commander designated as a terrorist by the United States and Israel, a man whose travel should have raised immediate flags at any legitimate airport. The revelation transformed the investigation's nature instantly, shifting from accident inquiry to potential assassination probe, with Cypriot officials suddenly aware they were handling a geopolitical incident rather than routine aviation tragedy. Intelligence agencies in Tel Aviv, Washington, and Brussels began exchanging encrypted communications, each analyzing the operation's signature and recognizing patterns consistent with Israeli methodology. Within Hezbollah's leadership, Karim's death provoked immediate accusations and demands for retaliation, with senior commanders publicly declaring Israeli responsibility despite having no forensic evidence to support the claim. Hassan Nasrallah addressed the accusation in a televised speech, calling Karim a martyr, eliminated by Zionist assassins who violated Lebanese sovereignty and international law through cowardly murder disguised as accident. The rhetoric was predictable, but behind closed doors, Hezbollah's security directorate conducted urgent reviews of their operational security protocols, recognizing that if Mossad could eliminate Karim aboard a private jet, then no protection measure was truly reliable. The incident exposed vulnerabilities in travel security that senior commanders had considered immune to Israeli penetration. Israel's official response followed the template perfected over decades of similar accusations, a foreign ministry statement expressing no knowledge of the incident and declining to comment on speculation regarding intelligence operations. Defense Minister Ehud Barak offered only calculated ambiguity when questioned by journalists, stating that Israel takes necessary measures to defend its citizens against threats, but cannot confirm or deny specific operational claims. The non-denial denial was deliberate strategy, allowing domestic audiences to infer Israeli responsibility and take satisfaction from effective action against enemies while maintaining international deniability that complicated diplomatic consequences. Behind this public theater, intelligence officials privately acknowledged the operation to Allied services, sharing enough details to demonstrate capability while reinforcing the message that Israeli reach extended anywhere targets made themselves accessible. European security services faced uncomfortable questions about how an assassination could occur in their operational space without detection or prevention, with aviation authorities across the continent reviewing private charter security protocols that had clearly proven insufficient. Cyprus endured particular criticism for allowing a known terrorist to transit their airspace, though Cypriot officials correctly noted that Karim traveled under false documentation, sophisticated enough to deceive standard screening. The diplomatic tensions remained manageable, largely because European governments privately recognized that Israeli actions, while legally questionable, served broader counter-terrorism interests by eliminating someone actively procuring weapons for organizations threatening Western allies. The public condemnations were pro forma, required by sovereignty concerns, but lacking the genuine outrage that might have produced lasting diplomatic consequences. Hezbollah's immediate response to Karim's assassination was organizational paranoia that rippled through every level of their command structure, triggering security overhauls that fundamentally altered how senior personnel operated. Hassan Nasrallah ordered the elimination of private aviation for all commanders, mandating that future travel occur through commercial flights or overland routes where security could be more directly controlled. The organization's counterintelligence unit began investigating everyone who had contact with Karim's travel arrangements, executing 3 individuals suspected of providing information to Israeli intelligence, though whether any were actually guilty remained uncertain. The purge extended to Meridian Executive Air's Lebanese employees, with 2 staff members disappearing under circumstances suggesting Hezbollah concluded they had facilitated the operation, correctly or otherwise. The strategic impact of Karim's elimination became apparent within months as Hezbollah's weapons procurement networks experienced significant disruption without his coordinating expertise. Shipments from Iran began arriving late or incomplete. Smuggling routes he had developed were abandoned due to exposure concerns, and the sophisticated logistical planning that characterized his work gave way to cruder methods that proved more vulnerable to Israeli interdiction. Intelligence assessments estimated that precision-guided missile acquisitions dropped by approximately 60% in the year following his death, a quantifiable degradation in Hezbollah's military capabilities directly attributable to removing the architect who made complex procurement operations function efficiently. His successors possessed loyalty and determination, but lacked his technical sophistication and operational discipline. Retaliation came slowly, but inevitably, with Hezbollah operatives conducting surveillance on Israeli targets across Europe and South America, seeking opportunities to strike back in ways that would demonstrate continued capability despite security setbacks. In March 2012, a bombing in New Delhi targeted Israeli diplomatic personnel, injuring 4 people in an attack Indian authorities linked to Hezbollah through forensic evidence and intelligence cooperation. 2 months later, a bus carrying Israeli tourists in Bulgaria exploded, killing 6 in an operation that bore Hezbollah's signature, despite the organization's official denials. The attacks were less sophisticated than Karim's assassination, reflecting Hezbollah's preference for visible violence over Mossad's invisible precision. But they served their purpose of signaling that Israeli actions would not go unanswered. The shadow war's escalation following Karim's death demonstrated the fundamental futility of assassination as strategic solution to conflicts driven by ideology rather than individual personalities. Eliminating one commander created temporary operational disruption, but did nothing to address the underlying dynamics that produced Hezbollah's hostility toward Israel or Iran's strategic interest in arming proxy forces. New procurement officers emerged to replace Karim, perhaps less effective initially, but learning quickly from both his successes and his fatal vulnerabilities. The cycle continued as it always had, each side eliminating the other's operatives while the broader conflict remained unchanged, assassination serving tactical objectives without achieving strategic resolution. Mossad had removed a capable enemy, but the war that produced him continued generating new adversaries as reliably as it always had. The elimination of Imad Karim aboard a private jet revealed something darker than any single death, the existence of a global system where intelligence services can weaponize civilian infrastructure to execute state-sanctioned killings with surgical precision. Commercial aviation, healthcare systems, telecommunications networks, financial institutions, all the interconnected machinery that enables modern life can be transformed into assassination tools by operatives possessing sufficient resources and technical expertise. Mossad's ability to compromise a charter aircraft demonstrated that no space is truly neutral, that private travel offers no immunity from state violence, and that the technologies designed to protect passengers can be reversed into mechanisms for their elimination. This represents a fundamental challenge to international norms, presuming certain spheres remain outside intelligence operations. The bureaucratic processes that authorized Karim's assassination operated with the same administrative precision as any corporate decision, analysts building cases through PowerPoint presentations, lawyers reviewing legal justifications, and officials signing approvals that transformed murder into policy. The language employed was deliberately sanitized, discussing threat mitigation rather than killing, neutralization rather than assassination, operational solutions rather than death. This linguistic distancing allows those involved to maintain psychological separation from the ultimate reality of what they authorize, creating moral cushioning that permits participation in lethal decisions without confronting their visceral nature. The hand that signed the execution order never saw the foam at Karim's lips or heard his final desperate attempts to breathe. What distinguishes modern assassination from historical precedent is not the act itself, but the technological sophistication and legal ambiguity surrounding its execution. Intelligence services no longer send agents with pistols into cafes, but engineer scenarios where targets die from apparently natural causes, mechanical failures, or medical conditions that forensic examination struggles to definitively attribute to external intervention. The operation against Karim required expertise from aeronautical engineers, toxicologists, electronics specialists, and intelligence analysts, a multidisciplinary team working for months to create conditions where one man would die in a manner appearing accidental. This industrialization of assassination, transforming murder into technical problem requiring engineering solutions, represents something qualitatively different from the political killings that characterized earlier eras. The moral questions raised by operations like Karim's assassination remain unresolved and perhaps unresolvable within frameworks where state security and individual rights exist in permanent tension. Was Israel justified in eliminating someone actively procuring weapons intended to kill Israeli civilians, or did the killing violate international law prohibiting extrajudicial executions regardless of target culpability? Does the effectiveness of assassination as counter-terrorism tool justify its employment? Or does legitimizing such methods erode legal structures that constrain state violence? These questions have no answers, satisfying both security imperatives and ethical principles. Only positions reflecting irreconcilable values about whether states may kill their enemies abroad when formal justice mechanisms prove inadequate. What remains certain is that intelligence services will continue conducting such operations as long as they possess capability and political authorization, and that the invisible war being fought across international borders will produce new Karims and new operations eliminating them, an endless cycle where security and morality never achieve equilibrium. 0948. The Gulf Stream still flies charter routes across the Mediterranean, its passengers unaware of the operation executed in that cabin. Subscribe to uncover more classified missions, where intelligence services transform ordinary spaces into invisible battlegrounds, and hit the notification bell because the next covert operation is already unfolding somewhere above us.